Honey, I just seem to keep my own personal views about that to myself because I'm just an entertainer and I'd rather not say.
The world only saw sequined jumpsuits and sold-out arenas. Elvis Presley was more than a performer. He was a phenomenon. But he was not immune to scandal and controversy. What kind of a man was he then? Decades after the king's death on August 16, 1977, we were in the dark about him. The man behind the legend remained an enigma. But this all changes now. Before she died, former Graceland Maid finally broke her silence on Elvis Presley. Today, we take an unfiltered glimpse into the life of the man behind the myth. Former Graceland Maid. Who was Nancy Rooks? In the early 1960s, Graceland already carried mythic weight. Purchased in 1957 for $102,500, Graceland sat on 13.8 acres along Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis, Tennessee. By the time Nancy Rooks entered its halls as a young employee, the home had become the nerve center of a global celebrity empire belonging to Elvis Presley, the most famous entertainer on earth. Rooks worked at Graceland for roughly a decade. Beginning in the 1960s, she cooked meals, cleaned rooms, and moved quietly through the daily rhythm of a house that never truly slept. Staff at Graceland were not distant employees who clocked in and out. They were constantly present. Elvis was known for staying awake late into the night and sleeping through much of the day. That meant Rooks and other staff adapted to a lifestyle where breakfast might be served at midnight and the kitchen might be active at 3 a.m. Rooks was not a distant observer. She was physically present inside the private world most fans never saw. And what she saw, no one else could have. While millions watched Elvis perform in Las Vegas, appear in films, or dominate radio charts, Rooks witnessed all that unfolded behind closed doors. She saw the television rooms filled with friends and the kitchen bustling with Southern comfort food. She saw the moments when the king of rock and roll was not on stage, not on camera, not surrounded by screaming crowds. Elvis's career exploded in the mid-1950s, beginning with his first recordings at Sun Records in Memphis, and accelerating after his 1956 breakthrough year. By the 1960s, he was a film star and international icon. During that decade, he made more than 30 movies. By the time Rooks was working in the house, Elvis was already a global phenomenon with record sales that would eventually surpass 500 million worldwide. Graceland was where business meetings happened, where friends gathered, and where daily life continued between tours and film projects. For decades after Elvis died on August 16, 1977, Rooks remained largely out of the spotlight. The turning point came in 1996. That year, she published her memoir, Inside Graceland, Elvis's Maid Remembers. By the mid-1990s, Elvis had been gone nearly 20 years, and Graceland had transformed into a museum that opened to the public in 1982. It was receiving more than 600,000 visitors annually. Public fascination had not faded. If anything, it had intensified. Rooks stepped forward into a world ready to hear insider memories from someone who had lived inside the myth. Her book became the primary documented source of her recollections. The stories attributed to Rooks come largely from this memoir. She described routines, meals, conversations, and household dynamics. She spoke about late-night cooking sessions and Elvis's fondness for comfort foods. She described the unpredictable schedule and the constant flow of visitors and friends. Rooks was not conducting an investigation. She was telling the story as she remembered it. Her book is a first-hand account. You see, Elvis lived in a world of intense privacy. His inner circle was famously tight-knit, often referred to as the Memphis Mafia, a group of friends and associates who traveled and lived alongside him. Access to the private Elvis was limited. Staff, like Rooks, were close enough to observe daily life, but not part of business negotiations, medical decisions, or legal matters. Graceland's rooms were famous for their distinctive design. The Jungle Room, added in the mid-1960s, featured green shag carpeting on the floor and ceiling. The TV room in the basement had 3 televisions installed so Elvis could watch multiple channels simultaneously. Rooks was moving through rooms that would later become museum exhibits. By the time Rooks began speaking publicly, the cultural status of Elvis had shifted from superstar to legend. He had won 3 Grammy Awards, all for gospel recordings, and received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award at age 36. His home had become a pilgrimage site. Memphis tourism centered around his legacy. But there were controversies too. Serious ones, but Rooks knew what others didn't. The private personality of Elvis Presley. Public Elvis was a phenomenon. By the time he reached his 30s, he had sold tens of millions of records, starred in 31 feature films, and performed in front of crowds that regularly exceeded 20,000 people per night during his Las Vegas residencies starting in 1969. His global record sales would eventually surpass 500 million. He was one of the most recognizable humans alive. Yet Rooks's memories consistently begin with something quieter: politeness. She described Elvis as unusually respectful toward staff. In a mansion that employed cooks, maids, security guards, assistants, and maintenance workers, Elvis insisted on learning names. He greeted people personally. He asked about families. He made conversation. According to Rooks, he disliked a strict employer-servant hierarchy and preferred a relaxed household atmosphere. Elvis was famous for gift-giving on a scale that became legendary. Stories of him buying cars for friends and strangers are well documented beyond Rooks's account. But she placed those gestures into the everyday routine of the house. She described sudden moments when Elvis would decide someone needed help and act immediately. Financial gifts, bonuses, or unexpected presents appeared without warning. In the 1970s, the cost of a new Cadillac could exceed $7,000, a substantial amount at the time, and Elvis famously purchased many of them as gifts. Inside the house, Rooks remembered that generosity as spontaneous rather than ceremonial. It was not staged for publicity. Then there was humor. The man who electrified audiences with hip-shaking performances reportedly enjoyed pranks at home. Rooks described laughter echoing through the halls late at night, playful teasing among friends, and a household atmosphere that often felt more like a gathering of extended family. Elvis loved movies and television, and the basement TV room famously contained 3 televisions side by side so he could watch multiple channels at once. This relaxed environment contrasted sharply with the world outside the gates. In public, Elvis faced relentless attention. His schedule was intense. In 1970 alone, he performed more than 100 shows. During his Las Vegas engagements at the International Hotel, later renamed the Las Vegas Hilton, he often performed 2 shows per night. The pressure was constant. Inside Graceland, Rooks said, he tried to create the opposite environment. Comfort food, familiar faces, and privacy formed a protective bubble. Yet, the calm environment did not erase loneliness. Rooks repeatedly described Elvis as shy and introverted despite his public persona. This contrast fascinated those who worked around him. On stage, he commanded arenas. Off stage, he preferred the company of a small circle of trusted friends. Fame had arrived quickly and early. By age 21, he had become a national sensation. By 22, he was serving in the U.S. Army in Germany, while being followed by international media. That level of attention never truly faded. According to Rooks, the result was a deep struggle with trust. She said Elvis found it difficult to know who genuinely cared for him and who was drawn to his fame. This uncertainty shaped the tight circle that surrounded him. Graceland became a sanctuary, a controlled environment where access was limited. Friends stayed for long stretches. Staff became familiar faces. Routine created safety. The mansion's gates were symbolic barriers between public chaos and private refuge. The emotional tension between fame and privacy became more visible in the 1970s. Elvis's touring schedule intensified, and his health challenges increased. Rooks described a man who still joked and laughed, but who also spent long hours reading, watching television, or talking quietly with close companions. He was fascinated by religion, philosophy, and spirituality. Books on these subjects filled his rooms. The contrast was striking. The world saw the sequined jumpsuits and sold-out concerts, while inside the mansion, Elvis spent nights reading and reflecting. This duality defined the private personality Rooks described. Public Elvis was loud, dazzling, and larger than life. Private Elvis was quieter, more reserved, and deeply dependent on his inner circle. Graceland's 13.8-acre estate was both a home and a fortress. The jungle room, with its green carpeting covering floors and ceilings, symbolized Elvis's love of comfort and escapism. The kitchen, often busy at midnight, symbolized routine and familiarity, and the estate ran like clockwork. Daily life inside Graceland. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Elvis had settled into a routine that baffled newcomers but became normal for the people who worked around him. Nights were active, days were quiet. He often stayed awake until sunrise, sometimes later, and slept through much of the afternoon. This pattern intensified after he returned to live performances in 1969, beginning his residency at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Performing 2 shows a night demanded a schedule that pushed his waking hours deeper into the night, and that rhythm followed him home to Memphis between tours. This meant daily life inside the mansion operated on a clock that never matched the outside world. Kitchen lights glowed at midnight. Televisions flickered at 3 a.m. Conversations drifted through hallways when the rest of the city was silent. Staff learned quickly that breakfast might be served at midnight, and dinner might happen at dawn. Elvis loved Southern comfort food, and the kitchen at Graceland functioned almost like a 24-hour diner. Fried chicken, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, biscuits, gravy, bacon, eggs, and desserts appeared regularly. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were a staple, but his meals extended far beyond that. Groceries arrived frequently. The refrigerator was kept stocked. Meals were often spontaneous. Food also created a sense of routine. In a life defined by travel, fame, and constant public attention, the act of gathering in the kitchen late at night offered familiarity. Friends, staff, and members of Elvis's inner circle gathered around tables while the rest of Memphis slept. These meals blurred the line between staff and household community. Conversations stretched late into the night. Entertainment inside the mansion rarely meant silence. Elvis loved movies and television. His basement TV room became legendary for one unusual detail: 3 televisions placed side by side so he could watch multiple channels at once. This setup, installed in the 1970s, symbolized his fascination with media and news. Late at night, he flipped between channels, tracking what was happening across the country while surrounded by friends and staff. Movies also played a huge role in the nightly routine. Elvis had starred in 31 feature films between 1956 and 1969, and cinema remained part of his life long after his acting career slowed. Private screenings became common inside the house. Watching films together became a group activity that stretched into the early hours. Elvis's close friends and associates, often called the Memphis Mafia, moved in and out of the house regularly. Some stayed for extended periods, others traveled with him on tours and returned between performances. The mansion rarely felt empty. Someone was always present. Conversation, music, and activity flowed continuously. Working at Graceland meant entering a world built on trust and loyalty. Employees were expected to respect privacy above all else. The gates of the estate symbolized a boundary between public and private life. Beyond them waited photographers, fans, and curiosity. Inside them, daily life continued with as little outside intrusion as possible. Privacy was not optional. It was essential. By the time Graceland opened to the public as a museum in 1982, it would eventually attract more than 600,000 visitors per year. But during his lifetime, the house functioned as a refuge from constant attention. Staff were part of the protective barrier that made that refuge possible. This refuge provided solace when Elvis needed it the most. Elvis's later years and declining health, the inside story. In 1969, Elvis Presley had staged one of the most dramatic comebacks in music history. After years focused on Hollywood films, he returned to live performance with a residency at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. The comeback was a massive success. He signed a performance deal worth about $1 million per year, a staggering figure at the time. From 1969 through 1977, he performed more than 600 shows in Las Vegas alone, and hundreds more on tour across the United States. The comeback revived his career. It also placed him on a relentless treadmill. Touring became intense. By the mid-1970s, Elvis sometimes performed more than 150 concerts in a single year. The travel was constant. The schedule was punishing. Flights, rehearsals, late-night shows, hotel rooms, and sudden time zone changes blurred into a continuous cycle. Rooks remembered the toll this took when he returned home between tours. Weight gain became noticeable in the early 1970s. Public photos from his concerts show the shift clearly. The sleek performer of the 1968 television comeback special gradually appeared heavier and more fatigued by the middle of the decade. Rooks described the change as slow and concerning, rather than dramatic. She said he often appeared exhausted after tours and relied heavily on rest once he returned to Memphis. Medication also became a central part of this period. Prescription medications were common in the entertainment industry at the time, particularly for performers managing intense schedules. Rooks acknowledged that Elvis took many medications, often prescribed by physicians to help him sleep, stay awake, or manage pain. She framed this as a response to pressure and exhaustion rather than reckless behavior. Her perspective focused on the demands of fame rather than addiction. The pressure was immense. Elvis's record sales had reached hundreds of millions worldwide. His concerts sold out rapidly. Every performance carried enormous expectations. The comeback that revived his career also locked him into a demanding routine. Rooks described a man who still loved performing but struggled with the physical and emotional cost of maintaining that level of fame. Despite constant company, Elvis lived within a tight circle. Fame had arrived early and never loosened its grip. By the time he reached his 40s, he had spent more than 2 decades under intense public scrutiny. Rooks believed the isolation created by that fame weighed heavily on him. Trust was difficult. Privacy was rare. Late nights became quieter. Elvis spent more time reading and watching television. Conversations often turned toward religion and spirituality. Books on these subjects filled his rooms. Rooks described him as reflective and increasingly inward-focused during these years. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley died at Graceland at the age of 42. The official cause of death was ruled a heart attack. Multiple prescription medications were found to be present in his system. They contributed to the circumstances surrounding his death. While the man himself passed away, the controversies refused to die. Rooks had observations on that as well. Controversies surrounding Elvis and how Rooks addressed them. By the 1970s, the myth surrounding Elvis Presley was no longer just about music, movies, or sold-out arenas. It had begun to shift into something more complicated. Fame always attracts scrutiny. Elvis was no exception. One of the most persistent controversies surrounding Elvis involved his relationships with younger women. Elvis met Priscilla Presley in 1959 in West Germany while he was serving in the U.S. Army. He was 24. She was much younger. Their relationship developed over several years before she moved to Memphis in 1963. They married on May 1, 1967, in Las Vegas. Their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born on February 1, 1968. Even during Elvis's lifetime, the age gap drew attention. However, in the decades after his death, modern audiences revisited the relationship. Rooks addressed these controversies directly in her memoir and interviews. She said she never witnessed behavior she considered abusive or predatory inside the household. When discussing Priscilla, Rooks framed the relationship as romantic and serious rather than scandalous. She described Elvis as deeply affectionate and excited about family life. The wedding in 1967 marked what many close to the couple believed would be a stable new chapter. For a time, the image seemed to match the reality. Elvis became a father at age 33, and Graceland adjusted to the presence of a child. Rooks remembered moments that felt ordinary: family meals, quiet evenings, domestic routines. The king of rock and roll, who had sold tens of millions of records by that point, was also a husband and father living in Memphis. But the calm did not last. By the early 1970s, the marriage had deteriorated. Elvis's touring schedule intensified after his 1969 Las Vegas comeback. He sometimes performed more than 150 concerts a year. Travel and distance strained the relationship. The divorce in 1973 became public and widely covered, fueling new conversations about his lifestyle and personal life. Criticism extended beyond relationships. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's weight gain and heavy use of prescription medication were widely discussed in the press. Tabloid coverage increased. Rumors multiplied. The superstar, who once symbolized youthful rebellion, now faced public scrutiny about his health, habits, and choices. Rooks acknowledged these changes but framed them through a lens of pressure rather than recklessness. She described the demands of fame as relentless. By the time Elvis died in 1977 at age 42, he had spent more than 2 decades in the global spotlight. He had sold hundreds of millions of records, performed thousands of concerts, and starred in more than 30 films. Rooks argued that the lifestyle surrounding him grew out of the pressure to sustain that level of success. Her defense of Elvis was consistent. She said she never saw cruelty toward staff or intentional misconduct toward others. She portrayed him as generous, polite, and protective of those around him. In her account, the private Elvis remained kind even as public criticism grew louder. This loyalty is a key part of understanding her perspective. Rooks was not an investigator or journalist. She was a longtime employee writing a memoir decades after the events she described. Her memories are firsthand, but they are also personal. She wrote from the viewpoint of someone who worked inside the household and remembered the man she knew rather than the icon the world debated. Outside the gates, the debate continues. Scholars, biographers, and journalists examine Elvis's life through documents, interviews, and cultural analysis. Inside the gates, Rooks remembered a different story: a household, a family, and a man she believed was misunderstood. The tension between those perspectives remains unresolved. The Graceland Maid's account adds another voice to a story that continues to evolve decades after the final curtain fell. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.